Memphis, Tennessee, late autumn of 1974. The kitchen clock had just passed 6:15 when the woman who had once worked as a switchboard operator set the chipped plate on the side table by the window. The remaining light rested on the faded placemat. She turned the chipped edge inward, placed the spoon on the right, then pulled the armchair closer. Inside the lower cabinet was a sleeve of saltine crackers, a jar of peanut butter already used nearly halfway, and a banana speckled with brown spots. The butter knife rested in a small cup beside the chair. 6 crackers were arranged in 2 rows. A slow twist of the jar lid blended with the sound of the clock hands on the wall. The chipped plate, the knife by the chair, and the recipe box that never closed completely. On the shelf sat the dark wooden recipe box, its curved lid revealing one corner of an oil-stained card. She pulled the box down. The smell of dry paper, cinnamon, and old vanilla escaped before the cards came into view. Dessert cards sat beside soup cards. The coupon was folded in half between 2 recipes. Some cards were written in faded pencil. Some used the back of an envelope. One card read fish, crackers, lemon if available. Another read 2 eggs, bread. A small slip of paper near the middle of the box contained only 3 words: banana, crackers, butter. None of the cards recorded which bowl was the lightest or which can was easier to open. They also did not note that the leftover fish had to be covered before dinner began, that the small pan always sat to the left of the stove, or how much milk second-day bread needed to soften without falling apart. Those things lived in the way she set objects down, in the short path from the chair to the cabinet, and in the habit of dividing 1 can into 2 meals. A 10-minute dinner did more than ease hunger. It preserved a part of the day for self-care. The first card belonged to a Portland kitchen during the rainy season of 1958, where a former cannery worker divided a can of fish before eating. The card marked 2 eggs, bread, led to Flint, Michigan in 1962 beside a clock running 3 minutes fast and a porcelain egg cup with a chipped base. The card marked banana, crackers, butter. Returned to Memphis, where the banana was left to ripen further so it could be mashed with a fork. Near the bottom of the box was a card that simply read, soup, add rice. There were no minutes listed. The clean streak left by the spoon along the bottom of the pot was enough. If old kitchens and oil-stained cards still hold something familiar, follow Old American Kitchen. Tonight, the box opens in East Portland. It's where rain is touching the roof, and the can opener is already waiting in the first drawer for canned fish, crackers, and dinners that need only 1 fork, Portland, Oregon. Rainy season of 1958. In the wooden house on the east side of the city, the woman who had once stood beside the salmon canning line pulled open the first drawer and took out a fork and a wooden-handled can opener. The canned fish was stacked at waist level, labels facing outward. Bread sat in a tin box. Saltine crackers were kept sealed in a paper sleeve. On the countertop was the card from the recipe box, bearing only the words fish, crackers, lemon if available. Rain tapped against the glass while she placed the can on a piece of cloth so the tin bottom would not slip. Dish number 30 was sardines on saltine crackers. Half a can and a portion of crackers cost about 17 cents. The oil was drained off, each fish lifted out with a fork and placed on top of a cracker. Larger pieces were lightly mashed. A few drops of lemon softened the smell of the oil. The crackers broke with a faint sound beneath the fork. The remaining fish was covered before she ate the first bite. Dish number 29 was tuna salad on toast. Half a can of tuna, 1 spoonful of mayonnaise, and 2 slices of bread cost about 21 cents. The tuna was flaked in a small bowl, mixed with pepper and a little pickle juice. The second-day bread was toasted just enough to firm the edges. The final corner of bread wiped clean the fish, still clinging to the bowl. Dish number 28 was canned salmon on toast, about 23 cents. She drained the liquid, pressed the soft bones into the meat, then spread the fish over still warm bread. The scent of salt drifted toward the damp curtain. The fork crushed the bones with the same motion she had used many years before. Dish number 27 was cottage cheese with canned peaches, about 16 cents. The 2 peach halves were drained of syrup and placed beside the chilled cottage cheese. The remainder was transferred to a glass bowl and covered with a small plate. The eating plate was washed, even though the kitchen stove had never been lit. Dish number 26 was cheese, saltine crackers, and apple slices, about 19 cents. The cheese was cut to fit the surface of the crackers. Half an apple was sliced thin, the other half wrapped in wax paper before she sat down. The wax paper held the portion of apple intended for tomorrow. Outside the window, the rain still touched the roof. The fork was washed, and the can opener returned to the first drawer. In the next kitchen, butter would touch the pan, and egg whites would begin to sizzle around the metal edge. Eggs, bread, and the small pan after the factory, Whistle, Flint, Michigan, 1962. The kitchen clock ran 3 minutes fast when the woman who had once worked in a factory supplying the automotive industry took 2 eggs from the refrigerator door. She had been retired for more than 6 years, but dinner was still set down near the hour when the factory whistle had once echoed across the workshop floor. The 8-inch pan sat to the left of the stove. The butter was kept in a covered dish. Behind the clock was a card written in pencil, 3 minutes if you want a soft yolk. Dish number 25 was a fried egg sandwich, about 13 cents. Butter sizzled around the egg white before the edges of the egg turned brown. She broke the yolk so it would not run onto her hand, placed the egg between 2 slices of bread, then cut it diagonally. The dish had once been packed into a factory lunch pail because it could be eaten during a short break. She sat down before the minute hand reached the hour of the old whistle. Dish number 24 was soft scrambled eggs with toast, about 15 cents. The eggs were beaten in a lightweight enamel bowl and then poured into a pan over low heat. The spatula drew from the edge toward the center until the folds of egg still held a glossy sheen. Butter steam fogged a section of glass near the stove. The final piece of bread gathered up all the egg remaining on the plate. Dish number 23 was creamed eggs on toast, about 18 cents. Butter, flour, and milk were stirred together in a small saucepan. Only when the spoon passed through and revealed a clean line along the bottom were the chopped hard-boiled eggs added. The smooth sauce covered 2 slices of old bread without requiring another egg. She watched the spoon mark, not the clock. Dish number 22 was poached eggs on toast, about 14 cents. The egg was slipped from a small cup into water that had only just reached a boil. The white wrapped around the yolk, leaving no smell of grease around the stove. When the fork touched down, the yellow center flowed into the gaps in the bread. The final corner of bread wiped away the streak of yolk from the plate. Dish number 21 was a soft-boiled egg with bread strips, about 11 cents. The egg was placed in a porcelain egg cup with a chipped base. The chipped section turned inward. She tapped the shellfly with the edge of a spoon and dipped buttered strips of bread into the hot yolk. The sound of porcelain touching metal echoed softly through the kitchen. The egg cup was washed and returned upside down to its usual place. The pan was wiped clean while still warm. The clock was still 3 minutes fast. In Memphis, even the distance from the stove to the table was about to become too long. Peanut butter, soft bread, meals that came all the way to the chair. Memphis, Tennessee, 1974. Near the middle of the recipe box was a card marked with a brown oil stain, bearing only the words banana, crackers, butter. Beside it, a smaller slip of paper carried the note, "Keep the knife beside the chair." The woman who had once worked as a switchboard operator placed the lightweight plate on the side table, loosened the lid of the peanut butter jar, and sat down before her knees began to stiffen. 6 crackers, just enough peanut butter, and the small knife were all within reach. The smell of roasted nuts escaped as the blade touched the inside wall of the jar. Dish number 20 was peanut butter on saltine crackers, about 10 cents. She spread each cracker just before eating so the surface would remain crisp. The crackers broke with a faint sound, leaving crumbs around the edge of the plate. A glass of water stood nearby because the thick peanut butter often clung to the roof of the mouth. 6 crackers left 6 short knife marks on the porcelain surface. Dish number 19 was a peanut butter and banana sandwich, about 15 cents. The banana was left for one more day until the flesh softened beneath its brown speckled peel. On days when her hands hurt, she mashed the banana with a fork and spread it over soft bread. The remaining half was placed upside down on a small plate for the following morning. Dish number 18 was bread and milk, about 9 cents. 2 slices of bread were torn into a shallow bowl, and milk was poured slowly until the pieces underneath softened. A little sugar settled at the bottom, sweeter in the final spoonfuls. When the spoon was set down, only a few undissolved grains remained. Dish number 17 was milk toast, about 11 cents. Toast was placed in the bowl first, then warm milk with butter was poured around the edge. The center softened first, while one corner of bread retained a bit of crispness. The bowl was already steady on the table when the first stream of milk touched down. Dish number 16 was cinnamon toast, no more than 8 cents. Sugar and cinnamon were pre-mixed in a small jar. She sprinkled the mixture over the still warm butter, then left the toast to cool beside the chair. The next morning, a few grains of cinnamon still rested on the placemat. The card was returned to the box, but the note reading, "Keep the knife," beside the chair remained on top. In San Antonio, warmth would soon return from an enamel pot with black handles. Canned soup, leftover rice, dinners fill it out in an enamel pot. San Antonio, Texas, 1971. Heat rising from the black-handled enamel pot fogged the window pane above the sink as the woman who had once worked in a school cafeteria placed a bowl of cold rice on the countertop. The card from the recipe box carried only the line, "Soup, add rice if too thin." Beneath it, in smaller writing, were the words, "Waste not, want not." The large pot had already been pushed into the back corner. Only the small pot remained on the stove, just large enough for 1 can of soup and portions of food too small to stand alone as dinner. Dish number 15 was tomato soup with saltine crackers, about 23 cents. The condensed soup was scraped from the can, mixed with water or milk, then heated over low flame. She broke the crackers directly over the bowl, each crisp piece floating for a few seconds before sinking into the pale red soup. The final cracker was broken only after the burner had been turned off. Dish number 14 was pantry soup with rice and leftover vegetables, about 27 cents when the rice had already come from the previous evening. 1 spoonful of cold rice, a few peas, and half a hard-boiled egg were stirred into chicken noodle soup. The rice absorbed the broth, causing the spoon to move more slowly across the bottom of the pot. The empty rice bowl was washed at the same time as the soup pot. Dish number 13 was canned chicken noodle soup with added egg noodles, about 31 cents. She broke a handful of dry noodles directly over the pot and stirred close to the bottom so the noodles would not stick. The scent of pepper, dried celery, and broth rose upward when the lid was lifted. A few short noodles still clung around the spoon at the bottom of the pot. Dish number 12 was stewed tomatoes on toast, about 18 cents. The tomatoes were cooked with butter, pepper, and a spoon-tip amount of sugar. A hot mixture soaked outward from the center of the bread slice to the edges, leaving a red streak across the plate. The final piece of bread held all the tomato liquid before being lifted. Dish number 11 was quick cheese sauce on toast, about 26 cents. The last slice of cheese was cut into small pieces and heated with milk and a little mustard until the spoon briefly revealed the bottom of the pot. It took the unchipped plate from the end of the stack. The good plate was washed before the cheese had time to dry. The pot was turned upside down beside the sink. The card returned to the recipe box next to the water stain that had blurred the final 2 words. In Cleveland, the metal handle in the first drawer had worn smooth exactly where a thumb had once rested. Corned beef hash. baked beans, and the can opener in the first drawer, Cleveland, Ohio, 1965. Beside the recipe box was a metal-handled can opener, worn smooth exactly where a thumb usually rested. One card marked with a dried sauce stain read, "Hash. Leave it alone until brown." Another contained only 4 words, "Beans on toast." The woman who had once packaged components for an automotive parts factory pulled open the first drawer and took out the can opener, soup spoon, and a small knife. Canned food sat on the lower shelf. The shallow skillet was to the left of the stove. Of the 4 burners, only one was lit. Dish number 10 was pan-fried corned beef hash, about 34 cents for half a can, a little fat, and 1 slice of bread. She placed the can on a cloth, then turned the cutting wheel around the edge of the tin. The soft mixture of beef and potatoes was spooned into the skillet and pressed into a thin layer with the back of the spoon. She set the spoon down, allowing the fat to sizzle around the edges without stirring. Only when the underside had browned did the spatula turn over small sections. The smell of salted beef and dried onions lingered near the burner. The remaining half of the can was covered with wax paper for breakfast the following morning. The spatula touched the bottom only after the crust was firm enough to hold its shape. Dish number 9 was baked beans on toast, about 16 cents. Half a can of beans was heated in a small saucepan with pepper and a few drops of the salty hot sauce remaining in the bottle. She watched the sauce thicken around the beans instead of watching the clock. The 2 slices of bread were toasted, buttered, and placed on a shallow plate before the beans were spooned over them. The tomato and molasses sauce soaked into the center of the bread slices, while the edges retained their crispness. The remaining half of the can had already been covered before she sat down. The final piece of bread gathered up every trace of sauce around the rim of the plate. The can opener was wiped dry and returned to the first drawer. On the stovetop the next day were 2 slices of bread, a paper-wrapped portion of cheese, a bowl of cold rice, and an open bag of egg noodles. The can was no longer there. The smallest pot still sat on the familiar burner. Hot cheese, buttered rice, and dishes that did not need a lag. Pot, Cleveland, Ohio, 1965. The following evening, the woman who had once packaged automotive components took the covered bowl of rice from the refrigerator and placed the slice of cheese wrapped in wax paper beside the shallow skillet. The open bag of egg noodles sat behind the flour container. The lightweight bowl was still at the outer edge, and the small pot was still on the front burner. In the recipe box, the cards near the bottom contained only a few words, written in larger handwriting, with butter stains that had soaked through the paper. Dish number 8 was a grilled cheese sandwich, about 12 cents. Butter was spread on the outside of 2 slices of bread before the cheese was placed between them. She lowered the sandwich into the skillet, pressed lightly with the spatula, and waited for the smell of browned butter to rise. The sandwich was turned only once. The outer edges became crisp, the inside remained soft, and the cheese held the 2 slices together. The table that had once held more plates was no longer fully set, but the knife still cut the sandwich along the same old diagonal line. Dish number 7 was rice mixed with butter, salt, and pepper, about 9 cents when the rice had already come from the previous evening. Put the rice into a pot with 1 spoonful of water, covered it, and left it over low heat. When steam escaped around the edge, a piece of butter was placed in the center. Rice grains that had hardened overnight gradually softened and took on a sheen beneath the wooden spoon. Salt and pepper were added last. The old rice bowl was not left for another night. The covered container was washed and returned to its proper shelf. Dish number 6 was egg noodles, with butter, salt, and pepper, about 11 cents. A handful of noodles, enough to fill the palm of a hand, was dropped into just enough water in the small pot. She used a lightweight strainer, drained the noodles, then returned them to the still warm metal pot. Butter melted among the steaming noodles, and black pepper clung to the thin glossy coating. There was no thick sauce and no meat that needed cutting. When the spoon was set down, a streak of butter remained at the bottom of the bowl. The skillet was wiped clean while still warm. The noodle pot was turned upside down beside the sink. The 4-burner stove used only the front burner. Near the bottom of the recipe box, one card read, porridge, butter, salt. The card beside it read, milk sauce. Stir until you see the bottom. A card near the end contained only 2 lines, cornbread and beans, 2 sausages, hot porridge, milk sauce. The cards near the ballon of the box, Joplin, Missouri, 1954. The cards near the bottom of the recipe box were shorter than the ones above, their edges darkened by flour and bacon grease. One card read, porridge, butter, salt. The card beside it contained only flour, brown sugar. The woman in the family of a former lead zinc miner placed the enamel pot on the front burner. Beside it were a deep bowl, a bottle of buttermilk, and a jar of grease that had solidified to an ivory color beneath a small plate used as a lid. Dish number 5 was hot porridge with butter and salt, about 7 cents a bowl, and she heated water mixed with milk, then sprinkled in the cereal a little at a time. The spoon moved close to the bottom of the pot in short circles until the porridge fell slowly from the spoon. A piece of butter was placed in the center of the bowl, melting into yellow streaks before disappearing into the white porridge. On colder evenings, the knife stayed in the drawer. The porridge required no cutting, and only the pot, bowl, and spoon reached the sink. The bowl still rested between both hands when more than half of the porridge had already been eaten. Dish number 4 was flour porridge with brown sugar and butter, about 8 cents. Milk mixed with water was heated in the same small pot. The flour was sprinkled in slowly to prevent lumps, and the spoon never left the bottom until the mixture became smooth. She leveled a spoonful of sugar against the rim of the jar, sprinkled the brown sugar over the porridge, then placed a small pat of butter in the center. A faint molasses scent rose with the steam of the milk. She did not stir everything together immediately. Each spoonful carried a different portion, some with more butter, others still holding a few grains of sugar. The brown streak still clung to the side of the bowl after the final spoonful. The note reading milk sauce, stir until you see the bottom, was placed beside the bag of flour. At the shelf remained a slice of bread from the day before, a portion of cornbread in the tin box, and a pot of pinto beans that had been cooked at the beginning of the week. The jar of bacon grease still stood beside the stove, its surface smooth beneath the small plate. The final 3 dinners did not begin with new ingredients. They began with things that had been saved: flour, milk, bread, grease, beans, and 2 sausages resting in the front compartment, milk sauce, grazy spread bread, and the last bowl still warm, Joplin, Missouri, 1954. On the countertop were the remaining cornbread from the day before, a bottle of cold buttermilk, and a note that read, milk sauce. Stir until you see the bottom. The woman in the family of a former lead zinc miner took the deep enamel bowl from the shelf. The jar of bacon grease still stood beside the front burner, its ivory-colored surface smooth beneath the small plate. The cards near the bottom of the recipe box did not list minutes. They preserved only the hand movements that had been repeated often enough to no longer require measuring. Dish number 3 was crumbled cornbread in buttermilk, about 7 cents. She broke the dry cornbread into spoon-sized pieces, then poured cold buttermilk over it until the lower layer began to soften. One short stir left the pieces on top still coarse, while the crumbs at the bottom swelled in the mild tang of the milk. The stove was never lit. It was only the sound of the spoon touching enamel and the bottle of milk returning to the refrigerator door. The bowl was still set down at its usual hour. Dish number 2 was bread covered with milk sauce, about 6 cents when the flour and grease were already on hand. She heated 1 spoonful of grease in a small skillet, sprinkled in flour, and stirred until all the fat had been absorbed. The milk was poured in gradually. Black pepper was added only when the spoon passed through and revealed the bottom of the skillet for a brief moment. In kitchens that knew how to save every portion, people still repeated, "Use it up." Wear it out. Make it do. Do without. The white sauce covered old bread, softening the center before the edges. She turned off the heat, while the spoon mark still held its shape. Dish number 1 was beans cooked with sliced sausage, about 21 cents. The pinto beans from earlier in the week were spooned into a small pot with a little broth. 2 sausages were cut into spoon-sized rounds and stirred into the sauce as it gradually heated. The beans were tender, the sausage salty and slightly smoky, and the bean liquid clung in a thin layer around each slice of meat. The remaining piece of cornbread rested beside the bowl to gather up the final spoonfuls of liquid. Steam was still rising when the chair was pulled close to the table. The spoon was set down. A small pot was turned upside down beside the sink. The recipe box returned to the shelf with the card marked beans, 2 sausages, resting beside the card marked banana, crackers, butter. Beneath the low light, the last bowl was still warm. The plate is still set, and the recipe box close, Memphis, Tennessee, late autumn of 1974. The kitchen clock had just reached 6:15 when the lid of the recipe box lowered over the cards that had passed through 6 kitchens. In Portland, half an apple rested in wax paper, and a fork crushed the soft fish bones. In Flint, the clock was still 3 minutes fast, and the egg cup with the chipped base sat upside down on a towel. In San Antonio, the empty rice bowl was washed alongside the soup pot. In Cleveland, the handle of the can opener was worn smooth beneath a thumb. In the kitchen in Joplin, the spoon mark still appeared beneath the milk sauce, before the bread was placed on the plate. 30 dinners did not require a kitchen full of food. Some dishes began with 1 egg, others with half a can of fish, a slice of bread, or a portion of rice covered and saved from the day before. The cast iron skillet was replaced by an 8-inch pan. Cans were moved to a lower shelf. Bananas were left to ripen for 1 more day. A knife was placed beside the chair before the knees began to ache. The covered rice, divided cans, and the wrapped half apple had already carried the saying from kitchen to kitchen. What was being preserved was not only food. It was also strength for the next time one had to stand up. At the side table beside the window, the chipped plate still rested on the faded placemat, the chipped edge turned inward. Only a few cracker crumbs remained from the 6 crackers. A smear of peanut butter lay near the rim of the plate. The glass of water was already more than half empty. The woman who had once worked as a switchboard operator gathered the crumbs with her fingertips, wiped the knife on a paper napkin folded into 4, then placed half a banana on a small plate. Though only 1 chair was occupied, the plate was still centered on the faded placemat. The card marked banana, crackers, butter, turned beside the card marked fish, crackers, lemon if available. Near the bottom of the box was the card marked beans, 2 sausages. The wooden lid lowered slowly, but the corner of a cream-colored card remained visible. The box was always opened at dinner time. If one of these dishes once appeared in your family kitchen, leave its name below. The recipe box will open again at supper time.